Welcome to Tiny Storytime YT channel, where completed and exciting stories are updated daily. Don't forget to subscribe. The story begins. At 16 years old, I was infamous in my class for being the ugly girl. But Ethan mistakenly thought I was the school beauty and began an online relationship with me that lasted 2 years. It wasn't until the day we met in person that he realized he had added the wrong WeChat contact. Feeling humiliated, he bullied me for 3 years, which led to my failure in the college entrance exams. Years later, his career and love life flourished, while I, trying to persevere, met a tragic end. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back at 16 years old, the very day we had planned to meet in person. I remember dying. It was on a cold winter night in a dingy hotel suite. A heavy-set man with a greasy, red face was strangling me, his meaty hands cutting off my breath. Just as I thought everything was about to end, the pain disappeared. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and froze. In front of me were rows upon rows of desks. Looking down, I saw high school textbooks and 2 brand new school uniforms. Around me were familiar faces from my high school days. On the podium, our homeroom teacher, Mr. Carter, was smiling as he introduced himself. But wasn't Mr. Carter already retired? Before I could make sense of the situation, I heard hurried footsteps from the doorway. "Excuse me." My heart skipped a beat. That voice. I turned to look at the door. A tall boy in black clothes stood there, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. His demeanor was nonchalant yet striking. I couldn't hold back a shiver. It was Ethan. My heart pounded uncontrollably, fear and hatred surging through me. My fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms as a sharp pain brought clarity. It wasn't a dream. I had truly been reborn. I was back at 16, on the first day of high school, the day Ethan and I had planned to meet in person. My life spiral of misfortune began with meeting Ethan. When I entered middle school, my body started to develop, and my face became riddled with acne. Boys in class often teased me, worsening my already introverted personality. Over time, I grew more self-conscious and avoided talking to my classmates. At my loneliest, Ethan accidentally added my WeChat instead of a tutor's. When he realized the mistake, he didn't delete me but instead offered to be friends. I agreed because, at the time, I was too lonely to refuse. We ended up in an online relationship that lasted 2 years. In our final year of middle school, Ethan proposed we meet in person. The idea terrified me. I wanted to see him but feared he'd reject me for my looks. Sensing my hesitation, he sent a message that would ruin me. "Lily, I know how wonderful you are. I don't care about your appearance. I like you for who you are." I believed his sweet lies and agreed that we'd meet if we both got into the same high school. In my previous life, we had planned to meet at the amusement park today. He said he wanted to take me on the Ferris wheel, dressed in a white dress I had picked just for this occasion. I went to meet him, heart brimming with joy. But the moment he saw me, his face changed. "You're Lily?" he asked in disbelief, staring at me, smiling nervously. I nodded. "Yes, I'm Lily." His expression darkened. He made a phone call, and within minutes, 3 or 4 rough-looking boys arrived. They were his lackeys. At his command, they dragged me into an alley and beat me mercilessly. Rain began to fall lightly, and my white dress was quickly covered in mud and footprints. Ethan kicked me hard in the stomach. The pain felt as if my insides were tearing apart. Struggling to call his name, I tried to ask why he was doing this, but he cut me off coldly. "Shut up. You filthy bee. You don't deserve to say my name. Someone as ugly as you pretending to be my goddess? Disgusting. Stay the hell away from me." It was then I realized he had indeed added the wrong WeChat contact. The person he had intended to add was Mia, the school beauty he secretly admired. My profile picture and hers were similar, and both of our names contained the character Lily. Leading to the mix-up, what I thought was salvation turned out to be a complete deception. After explaining that he had entered the wrong classroom, Ethan sat down as Mr. Carter waved it off, saying it was only the first day of school. Watching his back, I sank into deep thought. The girl Ethan truly liked was Mia, the celebrated academic star. In my previous life, to chase her, he pretended to be a model student. Over 3 years, He went from being at the bottom of the class to excelling and eventually getting into a top university in New York. Mia was moved by his determination and accepted his confession after the college entrance exams. His turnaround story became the school's inspirational legend. He was even invited back to give motivational speeches. While Ethan basked in applause and flowers, no one noticed the wreckage he left behind in the shadows. I failed my college entrance exams. Ethan saw me as a disgrace and treated me as his punching bag to release stress from his studies. For 3 whole years, he relentlessly bullied me, leaving me so broken that I couldn't even reach the minimum score for the lowest-tier colleges. In the end, I could only enroll in a local vocational school. Without a decent education, I struggled to find my footing in the workforce. To pay off the debts incurred from my father's medical treatments, I sold our house and worked multiple part-time jobs. Just as I was about to clear the debt, I encountered a drunken predator, and my life spiraled into tragedy. Memories of my past flashed through my mind like a movie reel until my phone vibrated in my pocket, snapping me back to reality. It was a message from Ethan. "Lily, what are you wearing today? I can't wait to see you. So excited." Image attached. Looking at the screen, I felt a wave of disgust. This shallow, appearance-obsessed hypocrite had the audacity to claim he didn't care about looks. It made my stomach turn. I didn't want anything to do with Ethan anymore. Without hesitation, I replied, "I'm tired of this. Let's delete each other. There's no need for us to meet." After sending the message, I blocked and deleted him without a second thought. The opening ceremony at school ended shortly after, and I rushed home without delay. As soon as I stepped through the door, a familiar aroma wafted through the air. My dad was in the kitchen, wearing a floral apron and busy preparing lunch. Seeing me, he greeted cheerfully, holding a spatula in hand. "Lily, you're back. I made your favorite spicy chicken. Go wash your hands and get ready to eat." Looking at his back, tears welled up in my eyes. Not wanting him to notice, I hurried to the bathroom to compose myself. When I returned, the dishes were already on the table. I picked up a piece of chicken and put it in my mouth. The familiar taste brought back a flood of memories, and I couldn't stop the tears from falling. Dad noticed and was startled. "What's wrong? Lily, why are you crying? Is it not good?" I quickly shook my head. "No, it's delicious. It's so good that it moved me to tears." In my previous life, my dad had passed away from stomach cancer in my second year of vocational school. I never thought I'd have the chance to eat a meal he cooked again. Hearing my words, Dad sighed in relief. He reached out to pat my head. "If you like it, eat more. You'll need the energy to go out and have fun with your friends later." In middle school, I didn't have any friends and spent my weekends holed up at home. Knowing I was going out with new friends today, Dad seemed genuinely happy for me. Of course, I wasn't going to meet Ethan. To avoid worrying Dad, I didn't explain and left the house after finishing my meal. Even though I had blocked Ethan, I still felt uneasy. This chance at rebirth was too precious to waste. To be extra cautious, I decided to visit the service center and cancel my old phone number. The summer sun was blazing as I left the service center, but I finally felt a sense of relief. At least now Ethan wouldn't be able to contact me anymore. For the next 2 months, Ethan didn't bother me. I thought I had successfully rid myself of him and focused entirely on my studies. But just as I felt secure, a note appeared in my desk drawer one day. The message scrawled on it read, "Don't leave after class. Wait for me." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if Ethan had written it. To test him, I threw the note into the trash in front of him. Glancing back, I caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't seem to react much, so I thought I might have been overthinking it. The next day, however, another note appeared in my drawer. This time, it read, "UB, if you run after class, you're dead." My stomach churned. That phrase, B, was Ethan's favorite insult. I'd heard it from him countless times in my past life. It became clear to me that Ethan was the one leaving the notes. But why? Why was he still harassing me even after I had completely cut ties with him? Refusing to let history repeat itself, I took the note to Mr. Carter, our homeroom teacher. The 3 years of bullying I endured in my past life had been a nightmare I could never forget. I wasn't going to let it happen again. Mr. Carter, with his stern demeanor and black-rimmed glasses, looked at the note and asked if I had any recent conflicts with classmates. I shook my head. No. I've been getting along well with everyone and haven't had any arguments. I received a similar note yesterday but didn't think much of it. But now that it's happened again, I'm scared and felt I had to tell you. Mr. Carter patted my shoulder. You did the right thing. If something happens, always come to the teacher instead of keeping it to yourself. He asked me to return to class and promised to investigate. Relieved, I nodded. As I turned to leave, a small smile tugged at my lips. Mr. Carter was familiar with the handwriting of every student in class. I knew it wouldn't take long for him to uncover the truth. Ethan wanted to play the role of a model student? Fine. I'd make sure the teacher saw exactly who he really was. That afternoon, Mr. Carter called Ethan to the office. When Ethan returned to class, his face was dark with rage, like a storm cloud about to burst. It was obvious he had been reprimanded. Still hot-headed, he slammed into my desk on purpose as he walked past, knocking 2 of my books to the floor. Before I could say anything, my male deskmate spoke up lazily. Ethan, why do you always look like your brain's underdeveloped? Can't even walk straight without hitting a desk. Ethan, already brimming with anger, snapped. Shut up. You cheating dog. Barking already? Want to get expelled that badly? A week ago, we rearranged our seating assignments. And my new deskmate was Nate. He had quite a reputation. During the first mock exam after school started, he was caught cheating by the dean and promptly demoted from the advanced class to the regular one. He now carried a major disciplinary record, and one more strike would mean expulsion. Nate raised an eyebrow and smirked lazily. Who knows? Maybe the school will expel you first. I expected Ethan to retaliate, but to my surprise, he only shot Nate a venomous glare before snapping. I'm not wasting my time arguing with someone like you. Disgusting. Then he turned to me. Lily, just you wait. After throwing out his threat, Ethan stormed off. I was a bit taken aback. Swallowing his anger like that wasn't Ethan's style. Could Nate have something on him? Ethan wasn't planning to let me off easily, but with midterms coming up next week, he was preoccupied with cramming. He was clearly trying to impress Mia with his academic improvement. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies as well. But having been away from these high school subjects for so long, I found it incredibly difficult. Other students could memorize 50 vocabulary words a day, while I struggled to barely retain 20. Don't even get me started on math, physics, and chemistry. They gave me a constant headache. When the midterm results came out, I only did well in Chinese and history. For every other subject, I barely scraped by. Staring at my test paper, I felt deeply frustrated. Was I destined to always be a mediocre student, no matter how many chances I got? Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Nate's score sheet. To my shock, he hadn't passed a single subject. His scores in Chinese, history, and politics were all 0, while his math, physics, and English scores were a laughable 11, 22, and 33 respectively. What on earth are these scores? I blurted out. Nate smirked, his expression tinged with mischief. The multiple choice questions were random guesses. I didn't even bother with the big ones. Then why didn't you at least guess on the Chinese and history papers? He shrugged, rubbing his eyes. Too many words on those papers. I was too lazy to read. Speechless, I turned back to reviewing my mistakes. A few minutes later, the class erupted in whispers as a pretty girl with a ponytail stormed into the room. She marched straight to Nate's desk, visibly upset. Nate, why didn't you take the exam seriously? Did you forget what Mr. Zhao told you? If you prove yourself, you could return to the advanced class. Nate leaned back in his chair, exuding nonchalance. Mia, that's your wishful thinking. I never planned to go back. So, this was Mia. I discreetly observed her. She was truly stunning. An oval face, large expressive eyes, fair skin, and jet black hair tied in a ponytail. She looked like the lead in a coming-of-age movie. Her cheeks flushed with emotion as sunlight highlighted her features. No wonder Ethan liked her. If I were him, I'd like her too. Mia and Nate fell into a tense silence. The atmosphere was heavy until Ethan burst into the room, sweaty from the basketball court. Mia, look, I passed every subject this time. Isn't that amazing? His eyes were brimming with tenderness when he looked at her. But the moment his gaze shifted to me and Nate, that warmth turned into open disdain. Mia, don't be so kind-hearted. Nate's just hopeless. And Lily? She's like a toad trying to climb up to heaven. Just looking at her makes me feel dirty. As he spoke, he reached for Mia's hand, attempting to pull her away. But Mia brushed him off with a swift motion, ignoring him entirely. Her eyes stayed on Nate. Nate, are you really planning to throw your future away? Nate didn't even look up, scoffing. What does that have to do with you? Mia bit her lip in frustration, her voice shaking as she replied. Fine. If I ever meddle in your business again, I'll be a dog. She spun on her heels and stormed out, with Ethan trailing behind her, awkwardly trying to console her. Watching the scene unfold, thought struck me. Ethan still hadn't won Mia over. I began finding opportunities to get closer to Mia. While she was cautious around boys, she was warm and friendly toward girls. Before long, we became friends. One weekend, I invited her to a bookstore to buy study guides. During our conversation, I learned more about Nate's situation. Mia's father and Nate's father were colleagues. The two of them had been classmates from elementary school through middle school. Both excelling academically, it was only natural for them to end up in the advanced class at our high school. However, shortly after the school year started, Nate's parents divorced. His father didn't want custody, and his mother, who worked in biotech research and spent most of her time in Germany, was hardly able to care for him. The divorce hit Nate hard, and he gave up on himself entirely. Even when accused of cheating, he didn't bother to defend himself. I felt a pang of regret. High school was such a crucial time. How could his parents choose to divorce now? Mia's expression darkened, and after a moment's hesitation, she spoke in a lowered voice. I heard from my mom that Mr. Yi was involved with another woman. She got pregnant and demanded a proper status. Mia reached out and held my hand. Nate's a very important friend to me. I can't just stand by and watch him ruin his future. Lily, I know this is asking a lot, but could you help me talk to him? He tilted his head slightly. His watery eyes filled with concern. Such a kind-hearted girl, I thought bitterly, would one day end up as Ethan's wife. Just imagining that possibility made me feel unsettled. So I smiled at her and said gently, "Don't say that. Nate is also my classmate, and helping each other is what classmates should do. Besides, I have a favor to ask of you too." "What is it?" Mia asked curiously. "Stay away from Ethan," I replied firmly. "He's no good. In my past life, his father ruined me for 3 years. In this life, I'll ruin his marriage. An eye for an eye." Mia readily agreed, clearly exasperated with Ethan's persistence. Hearing me criticize his character only deepened her dislike. We're supposed to focus on studying at this age, and he's here talking about love like it's some grand thing, saying he's sincere and will treat me well for life? Yeah, right. I'd rather spend my time solving math problems than deal with his nonsense. Don't worry, I won't give him a second glance. With Mia's assurance, I shifted my focus to building a better relationship with Nate. Since my rebirth, my mind had been consumed with avoiding Ethan and improving my grades. It wasn't until I parted ways with Mia that I remembered something from my past life. In my previous life, Nate and I hadn't been seatmates, but we had crossed paths briefly. During the first mock exams in senior year, Ethan performed poorly and, in his frustration, beat me up and locked me on the rooftop. I cried and screamed for what felt like forever. Just as the dismissal bell rang, a boy opened the door from the inside. It was Nate. He had kept his head down and quietly asked, "Are you okay?" At the time, I had been too focused on not wanting anyone to see me in my disheveled state. I mumbled a quick thank you and ran off. But as I exited the school building, a shadow suddenly fell from above. There was a loud crash, followed by a pool of blood. Nate had jumped. No one ever understood why a so-called slacker like him would choose to end his life. But now, I thought I knew. He felt useless, unneeded, and without purpose. No one wants to be an island. When someone feels entirely abandoned, their downfall becomes inevitable. This time, I decided to ensure that Nate felt needed. I approached him, feigning desperation, and begged him to tutor me. Not only would this help me improve my grades, but it would also bring us closer. Seemed like the perfect plan. Reality, however, was far less cooperative. Despite my best efforts to appeal to his emotions and logic, Nate remained indifferent. Every day, he would close his eyes and sleep in class, as if the school were a hotel. After a week of trying, my patience snapped. I confronted him on his way home. Nate, are you seriously throwing away your entire future for two people who couldn't care less about you? Don't you think that's incredibly foolish? Nate's expression darkened, standing under the dim streetlights. His profile was shadowed and hard to read. Lily, stay out of my business, he said quietly. I could tell he was angry, but I didn't care. Reasoning didn't work. Maybe harsh words would. Your parents abandoned you. Yes, but your friends and teachers, they care about you and want to see you succeed. Why do you only see the people who don't care, while ignoring those who do? He didn't respond. I sighed and stood closer to him. Nate, no matter what, you shouldn't give up on studying. I know about your parents' issues. You used to work so hard because good grades were the only way to make your family sit down together peacefully for a meal. But you've misunderstood something important. We study for ourselves, not for others. Education isn't the only path in life, but it gives us more choices. You already know how it feels to be discarded. Don't you want to hold the power to choose your own future? After that conversation, Nate finally began to change. He reconciled with Mia and even agreed to tutor me. But improving academically is easier said than done. Despite waking up earlier than the birds and sleeping later than the cows, even with a secret genius like Nate by my side, my progress was slow. Looking at my 91 on the math test, I couldn't help but feel disheartened. If I kept improving at this rate, I might get into a decent second-tier university. But aiming for a top-tier school still felt out of reach. Nate, chewing on the end of a pen, tried to console me. Relax. At least you broke 90 this time. That's 80 points higher than me. I glanced over at his paper, where the bold 11 on his math score stood out painfully. Nate, your obsession with low scores is ridiculous, I muttered. He grinned shamelessly. I'm conserving my strength. Just wait until the final exams. I'll blow everyone away. In stark contrast, Ethan was showing dramatic improvement. Originally admitted to this school through his family's connections and a hefty donation, he had been spurred into action after Mia rejected his confession, citing his poor academic performance. Fueled by his desire to impress her, he was now studying like a man possessed, cramming every hour of the day. This time, he broke into the top 100 of the grade rankings, a big step closer to Mia, who consistently placed in the top 3. People couldn't help but marvel at the power of love. But as they say, a leopard can't change its spots. No sooner had Ethan tasted success than he heard rumors about my growing friendship with Mia. Eager to cause trouble, he came looking for me. He snatched my test paper out of my hands and loudly announced, "Wow, only 91 points? Lily, with a brain like yours, what's the point of all this early rising and late studying? You'd be better off joining your deskmate for a nap." The class burst into laughter. I simply smiled and said, "Getting into the top 100 has already gone to your head? Mia's in the top 3. Isn't she? You've got a long way to go." Ethan. His face turned red with anger, and he jabbed a finger in my face. "You be." I knew it was Ethan spreading lies about me to Mia, which was why she wouldn't pay him any attention. "Don't think I'll hold back just because you're a girl," he sneered, raising his hand as if to hit me. He had always been this uncivilized. Otherwise, in my previous life, he wouldn't have used me as his personal punching bag for 3 years. Seeing his hand rise, I instinctively raised my own to block his punch. A few seconds passed, but his fist didn't hit me. Instead, Nate had stepped in, grabbing Ethan's wrist mid-air. "Hitting a girl now? Where's your shame?" Ethan exaggerated his shock, mocking, "Are you kidding me? Cheating scum like her doesn't even count as a girl. She's more like a toad." The words were cutting, but it was clear Ethan meant every one of them. In his eyes, only girls as beautiful as Mia deserved to be treated as such. Everyone else was just a dinosaur or a toad. Nate dropped his usual lazy demeanor, his voice turning cold and precise. "You think it's impressive to judge people based on their looks? You're nothing but shallow and vulgar. Mia despises men like you. Even if every man in the world disappeared, she still wouldn't choose you. Ethan's face flushed with rage. You son of a... he shouted, swinging his fist at Nate. Nate didn't back down, and the two of them started fighting in the classroom. The other students tried to intervene, but they couldn't separate them. Eventually, a teacher arrived and broke them apart. As was standard for fights, parents were called. Nate's parents didn't show up, but Ethan's mother arrived quickly. The moment she saw her son's bruised lip, she didn't hesitate to demand the school expel Nate. Mr. Carter, my son would never start a fight. It's clearly that delinquent's fault. Look at what he's done to my boy's face. And I heard he's cheated on exams before, too. A student with such terrible morals has no place at this school. I glanced at Ethan, immediately understanding the malice in his eyes. He had planned this all along. He knew Nate already had a disciplinary record, and another infraction would mean automatic expulsion. That's why he had provoked the fight. I stepped forward, interrupting Mrs. Davis. Ma'am, are you sure it was Nate who started the fight? I was there. Ethan tried to hit me first, and Nate stepped in to stop him. Ethan immediately shouted, Mom, Mr. Carter, don't listen to Lily's nonsense. She's been flirting with Nate. They're in a relationship. In a high school setting, the phrase dating was a sensitive topic. The moment Mr. Carter heard it, his expression turned serious. Lily, Nate, is there any truth to this? So, you'll both face disciplinary action. I advise you to be honest. Don't risk your futures over this. I kept calm and replied, Mr. Carter, I do bring Nate breakfast sometimes, but it's only to thank him for tutoring me after class. We are not in a relationship. Seeing my confident demeanor and recalling my recent improvement in grades, Mr. Carter's expression softened. Ethan, however, scoffed loudly. Nate tutoring you? Lily, at least try to make your lies believable. Nate's at the bottom of the class. How could he possibly tutor anyone? You're obviously lying to cover up your relationship. I mouthed an apology to Nate before pulling out a USB drive from my pocket. Mr. Carter, I have something to report as well. I'd like to expose Ethan for framing Nate during the mock exam earlier this semester. Nate didn't cheat. Ethan slipped the cheat sheet into Nate's pocket during the test. The room went silent as everyone turned to look at Ethan. His face turned pale, and he stammered, Lily, what nonsense are you spouting? We're talking about your relationship with Nate. And now you're trying to change the subject by slandering me. I'm telling the truth. I said coldly. This USB contains footage from the security cameras. Mr. Carter, you can review it for yourself. Ethan's panic was obvious. He growled, You're lying. How can we trust what's on a random USB? This is just you trying to frame me. I ignored him and handed the USB to Mr. Carter, explaining, Mia and I retrieved this footage from the security office 2 weeks ago. Every classroom is equipped with cameras, but because Nate didn't defend himself back then, no one thought to check. If we hadn't acted quickly, the footage would have been overwritten. Just as Mr. Carter reached for the USB, Ethan lunged forward, grabbed it, and hurled it out the open window. The office faced the construction site for a new building, and the tiny USB disappeared into the rubble below. If Nate didn't cheat, why didn't he speak up at the time? Ethan shouted, his voice dripping with feigned indignation. And now you're using some fake USB to accuse me? What a joke. I immediately felt a wave of anger toward Ethan. He looked smug, his lips curling into a satisfied smirk as if daring me to stop him. The heat in my chest burned hotter. But before I could react, Nate stepped forward calmly and said, Ethan, do you really think destroying the evidence solves everything? Lily's right. You framed me during that test. Ethan raised an eyebrow, sneering. Don't spout nonsense. Why would I go out of my way to frame you? I don't even have a reason to target you. You do. A sharp, clear voice rang out from the doorway. Mia had arrived, and I silently breathed a sigh of relief. While Nate and Ethan were fighting in the classroom earlier, I had secretly asked the class monitor to find Mia and bring her here. Mia walked straight to Mr. Carter, slamming a letter onto his desk. Mr. Carter, Ethan framed Nate because of me. Since the beginning of the semester, Ethan has been pestering me to be his girlfriend. Nate and I live in the same neighborhood, and we used to walk to and from school together. Ethan didn't like it, so he framed Nate for cheating during the exam. Ethan, desperate, blurted out, "Mia, don't let Nate fool you. If he didn't cheat, why is he always at the bottom of the class?" Mia shot back without hesitation. "Nate has always been a top student. If the school doesn't believe it, you can give him a test right now to see for yourselves." The room fell into a tense silence. Nate said nothing, but Ethan couldn't hold back. "Fine. Let's do it. Let's have a competition. Right here and now. If Nate loses, he and Lily have to voluntarily withdraw from this school. Nate, are you brave enough to take me on?" His confidence was almost laughable. Mr. Carter's expression darkened. "Ethan, this is not your personal playground. You don't have the authority to demand another student leave the school." Nate turned to Mr. Carter and said firmly, "I'm willing to compete with him. I just hope you'll give me the chance to prove myself. And don't worry, I won't ask for Ethan to be expelled if I win." Ethan scoffed, clearly not moved by the gesture. "Spare me the fake kindness. If I lose, I'll transfer schools myself." The math teacher quickly printed 2 copies of the semester's final exam. "You have 60 minutes. Start now." Nate and Ethan each found a seat and began working. The head of the grade personally supervised the test, while the rest of us waited outside the office. I paced nervously up and down the hallway. Mia noticed and tried to reassure me. "Don't worry. Nate has an IQ of 140. He's got this in the bag." I didn't doubt Nate's abilities, but the meaningful look he had given me earlier left me feeling uneasy. After a moment, Mia changed the subject, her tone playful. "By the way, don't tell me you and Nate really are dating. He's been working unusually hard lately." "What? No way." I was startled, waving my hands in denial. "Look around this entire school. Do you honestly think any guy would like me?" "Why not?" Mia countered without hesitation. "You're kind, thoughtful, and sweet. What's not to like?" I froze, her words catching me off guard. In my past life, I had been scorned by classmates and coworkers alike. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to be recognized or valued. Since my rebirth, I had taken steps to improve myself, exercising more and paying attention to my health. My acne had significantly cleared up, but deep down, I still felt insecure, convinced that I wasn't good enough for anyone to like me. Mia must have sensed my self-doubt. She smiled warmly and held my hand. "Lily, I know it's easy for me to say, but you need to have more confidence in yourself. You're not inferior to anyone. If someone judges you solely based on your appearance, it doesn't mean you're worthless. It just means they're shallow." Her sincerity made my chest ache, and I quickly looked away to avoid her gaze. An hour later, Nate and Ethan emerged from the office. The tests were graded on the spot. Ethan had scored an impressive 129, but Nate, unsurprisingly, had earned a perfect score. When the head of the grade announced the results, Ethan's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. Nate smiled faintly at him. "Sorry, I didn't realize you were this bad. If I'd known, I would have left some points unanswered to give you a chance. So, have you decided which school you'll transfer to?" Ethan's mother couldn't stay silent any longer. She jumped to his defense. "They're just kids. This was clearly a petty rivalry. How can we take it seriously?" Mia, unable to stand her hypocrisy, spoke up. "Ma'am, people need to keep their word. If you didn't agree with Ethan's challenge, why didn't you stop him from the start?" Ethan's mother knew she was in the wrong but wasn't about to back down. After all, this was the best high school in the city. Students from other schools would bend over backward to transfer in. No parent would willingly pull their child out. Mia wasn't done. Her voice sharpened as she turned to Ethan's mother. "I haven't even confronted you about the other things yet." Ethan's mother turned her anger on Mia, her voice sharp and biting. "Oh, so now you're accusing my son? There are so many girls in this school. Why would he write a love letter to you? You must have been the one seducing him first, right? You little troublemaker. With that fox-like face. Always thinking about how to hook boys. Let me warn you. Stay out of this, or I'll have the school call your parents." Mia, still just a teenage girl, was immediately overwhelmed. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she started crying. Mr. Carter quickly stepped in, pulling Mia behind him. "Mrs. Davis, You're a woman yourself. How can you say such things to a girl? And speaking of academics, Mia has consistently ranked in the top 10 of her grade. She may not be the best, but she's certainly no worse than your son. Instead of calming her, Mr. Carter's words only made Ethan's mother more furious. How dare you speak to me like that? I could file a complaint with the school board against you. Her arrogant tone filled the room as she hurled insults at everyone, finally leaving with Ethan in tow. As they passed me, Ethan gave me a long, malicious look. The darkness in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Carter assured us that the school would handle the matter and urged us to focus on our studies. As we left the building, Mia's face was still clouded with worry. I'm not sure how the teachers will handle this, but I doubt Ethan and his family will let it go so easily. Nate, however, was emotionless as he stared at me. Lily, don't you have something to say about today's events? From the beginning, you've deliberately approached both Mia and me. What are you hiding? Dark clouds gathered overhead, blocking out the sun. Mia looked at Nate in confusion. What's wrong with you? Why are you acting crazy all of a sudden? Nate didn't answer, his piercing gaze fixed on me. I took a deep breath and began to speak, recounting everything about my past relationship with Ethan. You're right. I did approach you two with a purpose. I used you, and I'm sorry, but I don't regret it. Ethan is like a rabid dog. The more you give in, the more he takes. I was reborn to fix the mistakes of my past life and live differently. I refuse to be his punching bag again. That's why I have to fight back. I looked at both of them and said softly, after today, you probably won't want anything to do with me. I'll request a seat change tomorrow. Mia suddenly planted her hands on her hips and shouted, Are you kidding me? Lily? Sure. I'm mad, but not because you kept things from me. I'm mad that, as your friend, I didn't help you when you were scared and worried. You're like a turtle, always bottling everything up. Then she turned to Nate, cutting him off before he could speak. And you, Nate, Lily may have kept things from us, but it was for a reason. Whatever her intentions were, the fact is that she warned me about Ethan and cleared your name. We've both benefited because of her. Nate started to protest, but I never asked for her help. Mia didn't let him finish. Oh, shut it. Instead of sulking, how about studying harder for a change? Stop trying to act like the protagonist of some web novel and grow up. If you have time to sulk, you have time to practice math problems. Her outburst lightened the tense atmosphere, and I hesitantly asked, So, you're still willing to be friends with me? Of course. Mia said firmly. Nate, after a pause, mumbled a quiet, Yeah. The golden glow of the setting sun reflected in his clear eyes as he added, But as friends, we're supposed to share our burdens. From now on, no more secrets between us. Ethan's revenge came swiftly. A few days later, my dad's breakfast shop was vandalized. After losing his job, my dad had used his severance pay to open a small shop, relying on it to support the two of us after my mom left. For over a decade, that shop had been our lifeline. But now, it was in ruins. The shutters were covered in graffiti with vile insults sprayed in red paint, and the interior was trashed. The surveillance cameras outside had been deliberately destroyed, leaving no clues. The next morning, on my way to school, I ran into Ethan. He lowered his voice and smirked. Did you like the little gift I sent you? If you're smart, you'll stop opposing me. Otherwise, next time, it won't just be your dad's shop. He walked away before I could respond, his carefree stride enraging me. My hands clenched into fists as I glared at his retreating figure. How dare he involve my family? When Mia found out what had happened, she was furious. She stormed off, determined to confront Ethan. But Nate grabbed her arm to stop her. Calm down, he said. My friend was bullied, and you're telling me to calm down. Mia snapped, her eyes blazing as she glared at him. Let me ask you one thing. Was what he did humanly decent? Doesn't he deserve a beating? He does, Nate admitted. But we don't have any proof right now. Nate's right, I said quietly. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. I already had a plan in mind, but I needed their help. The next day after school, I approached Ethan, putting on a submissive act. Ethan, can I talk to you for a moment? It won't take long. I promise. Ethan seeing the pleading look on my face, smirked with satisfaction and followed me to the wooded area behind the school building. As soon as we arrived, I dropped to my knees with a loud thud. Ethan, please stop sending people to wreck my dad's shop. I was wrong. I shouldn't have gone against you. I'll never do it again. Please. I'm begging you. Leave my dad alone. Ethan looked at me, momentarily puzzled. He had orchestrated the initial attack on the shop but hadn't sent anyone after that. Still, the sight of me groveling filled him with glee. He raised his eyebrows and sneered. Lily, you really are pathetic. You only know how to behave after I put you in your place. If you'd acted like this sooner, I wouldn't have had to mess with your dad's shop. I kept my head low, my voice trembling. It's my fault. I didn't know better and made you angry. I'm so sorry. Ethan, please forgive me. Be the bigger person. Ethan pressed his foot against my shoulder, laughing coldly. If you're begging, at least do it properly. Show some sincerity. I stiffened, pretending to hesitate before bowing my head 3 times, my voice cracking as I begged. Please, show mercy. Let my dad go. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke, and Ethan was clearly pleased with the performance. Not bad, he said. From now on, you're my obedient little pet. Whatever I tell you to do, you do it. Got it? I nodded submissively. Satisfied, Ethan kicked me to the ground and walked away, whistling as if nothing had happened. As soon as he was gone, Nate and Mia emerged from their hiding spot nearby. Mia rushed to me, pulling tissues from her bag to wipe the dirt off my face. Lily, are you hurt? I shook my head and got to my feet. Don't worry. I'm fine. Did you record everything? Nate nodded. Got it all. I even used a professional camera from home. The footage is crystal clear. Audio and all. Hearing that, I allowed myself a small smile. Everything that had just happened was part of a plan I had orchestrated to get Ethan to admit on camera that he had ordered the attack on my dad's shop. But this was just the first step. Ethan's days of unchecked cruelty were numbered. After that day, I became the most obedient presence around Ethan, never fighting back or talking back. I distanced myself from Nate and Mia and barely interacted with anyone else in class. This charade lasted for about 2 weeks until Ethan's birthday. We were in the middle of class when the dean suddenly came in and called Ethan to the office. Minutes later, Mr. Carter arrived and asked me to come to the office as well. Lily, Mr. Carter began, his tone concerned. You've seemed distracted in class lately. Are you feeling unwell? I shook my head, instinctively hiding my hands behind my back. Just the day before, Ethan had beaten me after a failed test, leaving bruises on my arms, but I kept my head down, saying nothing. Mr. Carter sighed. Lily, I need you to be honest with me. Last night, the school board received an anonymous email with a video of Ethan bullying you. The district is taking this very seriously. If you've been hurt, we need you to speak up. I bit my lip, pretending to hesitate. I already knew about the email. It was my doing. The file included footage of Ethan harassing me in the woods, as well as videos of him fighting off campus, partying in bars, and evidence of his parents frequenting high-end establishments, all captured thanks to my memories of past events. But the time wasn't right yet. I had to bide my time. I whispered, Mr. Carter, you don't need to lie to me. It doesn't matter if I speak up. Ethan's father works for the district. Even if someone reports him, it'll just get swept under the rug. I'm just an ordinary girl. I can't fight him. Mr. Carter frowned, standing up and taking hold of my arm. I winced in pain, unable to stifle a small cry. His expression darkened as he rolled up my sleeve, revealing the bruises. What happened here? His voice was sharp with anger. Did Ethan do this? When did it happen? Under his relentless questioning and reassurances, I finally admitted to being bullied by Ethan. Furious, Mr. Carter took me to the hospital to document my injuries and reported the incident to the school and relevant authorities. With concrete evidence in hand, the school quickly expelled Ethan. His father was also dismissed from his position for covering up Ethan's behavior and abusing his authority. When Ethan's mother came to the school to handle the withdrawal paperwork, she was a shadow of her former arrogant self. She passed me and Mia in the hallway without a single harsh word. Mia, still processing everything, turned to me wide-eyed. Lily, am I dreaming? Is this really the same woman who swore she'd make us suffer? His transformation was shocking, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. Ethan and his accomplices had only been so brazen because they relied on his father's influence as their safety net. Now that his father had been fired, their arrogance crumbled along with their support. From what Mr. Carter told us, no school was willing to accept Ethan anymore. He had no choice but to return to his hometown to continue his studies. All my patience and endurance had paid off. I had finally rid myself of Ethan for good. I didn't expect Ethan to resurface and cause trouble again. During the college entrance exams, Nate was assigned to a different testing center, while Mia and I were at the same one. After completing our final exam, Mia and I planned to walk home together. As we stepped out of the school gates, Ethan suddenly emerged from the crowd and grabbed Mia's wrist. "Mia, come home with me," he said, his tone bordering on desperation. Mia jerked her hand away with all her strength. "Are you crazy? We're not even close. Why would I go anywhere with you?" Ethan's face twisted with madness, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder, had Ethan also been reborn? My suspicion was confirmed moments later when Ethan stepped closer to Mia, his voice chilling. "Of course. We're close. Mia, don't you remember? We got married. You're my wife. Let's go home." Though he smiled, his eyes were icy. My body reacted faster than my mind. I shoved him hard, forcing him to stumble back a few steps. Ethan glared at me with a venomous intensity. "I almost forgot about you. You meddlesome bee. If it weren't for you, Mia would already be mine. Everything I've lost is because of you. Let's settle this once and for all." He pulled a folding knife from his pocket. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed Mia's hand, pulling her with me as we ran back toward the school. Ethan gave chase, his footsteps pounding behind us. Mia and I narrowly escaped Ethan's attack. Police officers stationed at the exam center intervened and apprehended him before he could reach us. Ethan was taken into custody, and Mia and I were brought to the station to give our statements. When we emerged from the station, my dad and Mia's parents were waiting anxiously for us. Nate had also rushed over after hearing the news. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Nate asked, his voice filled with concern. I chose not to reveal Ethan's rebirth, explaining only that he likely held a grudge and sought revenge. For the next week, I was on edge, constantly worrying about Ethan being released and coming after us again. But what I didn't expect was for Ethan to meet his end before he could act. After my report, Ethan's father had become unemployed and spent his days drinking heavily. When drunk, he often turned violent. On the day Ethan was released from the station, his father started another fight, this time with fatal consequences. Father and son ended up killing each other in the brawl. Ethan's mother survived but was left permanently disabled. A day later, Mia invited me out for lunch. Over our meal, she shared a strange dream she had the night before. In the dream, I was with Ethan. She began hesitantly. We were married, but a year later, I found out that back in high school, Ethan had framed Nate for cheating. I confronted him, and we had a massive argument. I couldn't forgive myself, nor could I stay with someone who had hurt my friend. I asked for a divorce, but Ethan became enraged and hit me. After that, he completely changed. He imprisoned me, cut me off from the outside world, and treated me like his possession. When I tried to escape, he caught me, and in the struggle, I killed him. Mia's voice trembled as she finished. Her words left me in stunned silence. I realized this might not have been just a dream. It could very well have been Mia's reality in her previous life. Ethan's destruction hadn't been limited to just me. Gripping her hand tightly, I said earnestly, "Mia, dreams are often the opposite of reality. You'll have a bright future. Don't waste your energy thinking about someone like him. He's not worth it." Mia smiled, nodding. "I know. I'm not dwelling on it. I just thought it was such a ridiculous dream. I had to share it with you. You're so sensitive sometimes." Lily. About 20 days later, the college entrance exam results were released. The three of us had all been accepted to our desired universities. Mia and I chose schools in the South, while Nate opted for one in the North. The future was uncertain, but I felt no fear. Just as the sun always breaks through after the rain, we, having weathered our storms, would surely grow into the people we aspired to be. I spent my whole life with my husband, supporting each other through thick and thin, only to be reborn into my college years. Overwhelmed with excitement, I rushed to find him, only to see him standing under the dormitory building confessing to the class beauty. Missing out on you would be the greatest regret of my life. Sophia, you've been standing in front of the mirror for at least half an hour. What are you doing? Admiring my beauty. Of course, I replied dreamily, gazing at the slim and graceful girl in the mirror. A tiny waist, long legs, fair and smooth skin, no wrinkles at all. Was this really how I looked at 18? Being young was truly wonderful. Stop preening. It's lively downstairs. Ethan is standing at the entrance with a bouquet of flowers, waiting to confess to someone. My roommate Diana entered the room, holding a cup of milk tea, her face glowing with excitement as she shared the latest gossip. Ethan. Ethan. I slapped my forehead. I'd been so engrossed in admiring my youthful beauty that I completely forgot about my husband. Grabbing a jacket, I sprinted downstairs to the dormitory entrance. Ethan must have been reborn with me. His youthful body and spirit probably made him eager to romance me again. He even brought me flowers. The last time he gave me flowers was the year I gave birth to our son. It was the only time he ever gave me flowers, saying it was to thank me for continuing the family line. Thinking of our son, I absent-mindedly touched my flat stomach. It even had faint abs. Baby, let mommy enjoy a few more years of youth before bringing you into the world again. Ethan and I had been college sweethearts. We walked hand in hand from university to the altar, experiencing quarrels, breakups, poverty, and success together. We built a life, lost it all, and started over. At our lowest, we lived in a basement, surviving on boiled water and plain steamed buns. When we had money, we bought a villa. Ethan even bought houses for his parents and siblings, supporting each other, stumbling along the way. We shared a lifetime. In our last life, we were so busy building a business and earning money that, by the time we were old, we realized we had worked our lives away without truly living or seeing the world. This time, I vowed to travel more and do all the things we never had the time or energy to do. Ethan stood at the dorm entrance with a bouquet of flowers, nervous. He rubbed his fingers along the seams of his pants. I chuckled softly. During our startup days, Ethan had been shy and introverted, struggling with social anxiety. He forced himself to learn small talk and pleasantries for the sake of the business. That nervous habit had started then. It's perfect. Ethan must have been reborn with me. What are you staring at? Sophia, my roommate, Lily, poked my arm, following my gaze outside. Just then, Ethan turned his head. The sunlight illuminated his young and handsome face, his eyes sparkling like gold. He smiled shyly, dimples appearing on his cheeks. The 18-year-old Ethan always made my heart race. He began walking toward me with the bouquet, each step steady, as if retracing a lifetime with me. I took a deep breath and opened my arms to embrace the happiness that was mine once again. Lily, I've liked you for a long time. Missing out on you would be the greatest regret of my life. Will you give me a chance to be your boyfriend? Lily looked flustered. Her face reddened as she glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers who began to cheer. Say yes. Say yes. I slowly lowered my outstretched arms, realizing Ethan's passionate gaze wasn't directed at me but at Lily. His eyes were filled with fervor, focused solely on her, as though the bustling world around him had faded into silence. I, standing next to Lily, was nothing more than a white backdrop, unnoticed even by the corner of his eye. So, the Ethan who spent a lifetime as my husband had always been in love with Lily? I stumbled back, memories of our past life rushing back. It had rained that day. I had run out to collect a package. Lily, borrowing my umbrella and coat, insisted I take her jacket and hat, saying they were water-resistant. In my hurry, I dashed out wearing her clothes, only to bump into Ethan at the dormitory entrance. He grabbed my arm and said, I like you. Be my girlfriend. I'd liked Ethan for a long time by then. From the moment I first saw him at the start of the semester, I'd secretly admired him. When the boy I had a crush on confessed to me in the rain, how could I not fall in love? From that moment, I loved rainy days. No wonder, no wonder. Ethan must have mistaken me for Lily back then. And now, having been reborn, His first priority was to pursue the one who had always been his true love. That forever untouchable, unforgettably perfect girl. I took another step back. Then another. Ethan stood, waiting nervously for Lily's reply. Sweat beading on his forehead. A drop slipped down his brow and into his eye. But he kept them wide open, afraid to miss her answer. My heart felt like a sinking weight, as though I'd swallowed a shard of ice on the coldest winter day. Funny, isn't it? Even when we met the most important client of our lives, Ethan had never been this nervous. Not even when I was in labor with our child. I lay pale on the hospital bed, gripping Ethan's hand tightly as I asked him, I'm about to have our baby. Are you nervous? Ethan only replied nonchalantly, modern medicine is very advanced. Don't worry unnecessarily. Then he casually sat down nearby and started playing video games. I was furious at the time, but after I came out of the operating room, he handed me a bouquet of flowers. That was just how Ethan was. He'd slap you with one hand and give you candy with the other. He wasn't nervous about childbirth, not nervous about meeting clients, not even nervous when our son took his college entrance exams or got married. But now, confessing his love, twice reborn, how was it that he was this nervous? I stared at Ethan seriously, at this man I had loved for a lifetime. His face overlapped with the memories in my mind, shattering the beautiful dream I had built over all those years. Say yes. Say yes. The crowd chanted around us. The noise chaotic and overwhelming. The sounds drew closer and farther away, and the figures before me blurred and overlapped. I pinched my palm, realizing I might have been hit by heatstroke. I'll think about it, Lily stammered, flustered by the crowd's cheers. She glanced around nervously and finally cast me a pleading look for help. That moment, Ethan finally noticed me. He strode toward me, holding the bouquet tightly, and grabbed my arm. Sophia, thank goodness you're here. You're the closest to Lily. Please help me convince her. I've liked her for so many years. I promise I'll treat her so well. Please, help me. The radiant sunset bathed Ethan in a golden light, softening his silhouette. Standing against the light, I looked at his partially shadowed face, and my memories dragged me back to the year we started our business. We had worked late into the night, and by the time we finished, all the buses and subways had stopped running. Taking a taxi was out of the question. The fare was too expensive. Worth a day's meals for the two of us. The freezing winter streets left my toes numb as I walked beside Ethan, blowing on my hands for warmth. Despite the hardships, my heart was filled with joy. Life was tough, but I wasn't alone. I had the one I loved by my side. The future seemed bright and full of promise. For once, Ethan had taken the initiative to hold my hand. He thanked me for enduring the struggles with him and promised he'd give me a better life someday. He said he loved me. Liar. Why are you troubling Sophia for this? It's between you and me. Lily's crisp voice interrupted my thoughts. She stepped forward, looping her arm through mine, and tilted her chin toward Ethan with feigned indifference. I said I need time to think about it. Go back for now. Come on, Sophia. Let's go get dinner. With that, Lily dragged my dazed self away, leaving an equally stunned Ethan standing there. Back at our dorm, Lily waved her hand in front of my face. Your noodles are going to get soggy if you don't eat them. What's with you? You look so distracted. I bit my chopsticks, my heart heavy with mixed emotions. Are you really not going to accept Ethan? I asked cautiously, feeling ridiculous as soon as the words left my mouth. Reborn into our college years, Ethan and I were both free. Legally, he didn't owe me anything. The promises we had made belonged to our past life. Now, we weren't a couple, not even close. He had every right to pursue happiness again. What? Just because he says one sentence, I have to agree? What would that make me? Lily replied nonchalantly, shrugging. Men are like that. If they can't have you, they'll treasure you more. Let him stew for a bit and see how he acts. I sipped the noodle soup, trying to suppress the bitterness rising in my chest. I couldn't help but feel a trace of envy toward Lily. Her family was well off. Her father owned a company, and her mother was a government official. Unlike Ethan and me, who had come from rural backgrounds, Lily carried herself with a confidence and pride that only city kids seemed to have. The things I had longed for but couldn't obtain were simply part of her everyday life. Ethan wasn't deterred by Lily's rejection. Having lived another lifetime, his resilience was stronger now. He started showing up under our dorm building every day, diligently bringing Lily gifts, flowers, milk tea, snacks, fried chicken. Our dorm mates, feeling indebted after eating so much of his food, began teasing Lily in his favor. From my initial heartbreak and anger, I quickly found my emotions settling down over the next few days. Ethan didn't even consider the possibility that I, too, had been reborn. He looked at me like a stranger, going so far as to block me to avoid causing misunderstandings with Lily. 60 years of companionship. Was there no love, or even a shred of affection, left between us? It was only then that I realized how deeply mistaken I had been. I had loved Ethan for a lifetime, but perhaps he had only tolerated me for the same amount of time. Our relationship had begun because of a misunderstanding, and he had been too shy to suggest breaking up. Later, I helped him so much, paid for our wedding dowry even, that his sense of guilt stopped him from leaving. For me, our long life together was a beautiful fairy tale. For Ethan, it had been a suffocating cage. He didn't love me, but he couldn't escape me. Now, reborn and finally freed from that cage, why would he ever want to be tied to me again? Lily, are you really not planning to accept Ethan? Diana asked, chewing on one of the marinated chicken feet Ethan had brought. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. Lily, wearing a face mask, spoke in a muffled voice. It's just the beginning. This is nowhere near the end, like they say. The long march was 25,000 miles. Of course you've got to test a man thoroughly. I was engrossed in my book when a thought suddenly struck me. Where was Ethan getting the money to buy so many gifts? Oh, crap. I muttered under my breath as a realization dawned on me. Our class had one highly coveted scholarship each year, awarding $10,000 to the recipient. Every year, I gave that scholarship to Ethan. Both of us were from poor rural families, but my grades were consistently better than his. And my family's financial situation was even worse. The counselor had once told me directly that I was the most deserving candidate for the award. But when I thought about Ethan's perpetually faded genes, I decided to give it to him and chose to work part-time jobs to support myself instead. Now, all I wanted was to slap myself twice as hard as I could. The scholarship had just been distributed, so of course Ethan had money, and all of it was being spent to chase after Lily. I stood up angrily and grabbed the box of chicken feet from Diana's hands. I want to eat these too. Diana jumped in surprise. What's gotten into you? Are you starving or something? Fine. Take it. Eat it all. Oh, by the way, Diana said, suddenly remembering something. Sophia, did you hear about the new alumni scholarship? They just announced it. I paused mid-bite and slapped my thigh. How could I have forgotten about that? A senior from our department who had graduated 2 years ago, Peyton, had become wildly successful with his startup. Rumor had it that he had secured millions in funding for his ventures. He was now collaborating with the university on a research project, and had whimsically decided to sponsor 2 students from our department. One spot had already gone to someone from the neighboring class, and the other, of course, went to Ethan. Once again, I had given it up to him. Unlike the regular scholarships, Peyton's award covered all tuition and living expenses for 4 years. That money eventually became Ethan's startup capital after he graduated. I spat out the chicken bone and bolted out of the dorm toward the counselor's office. In my last life, I had voluntarily withdrawn my candidacy. This time, I wasn't about to miss my chance. Gasping for air after sprinting all the way, I leaned against the doorframe to catch my breath. Inside, a tall figure stood with his back to me, silhouetted against the light. I couldn't make out his face, but the voice was all too familiar, cold and calm. Teacher, Sophia has already decided to withdraw. Please give the spot to me. Fury surged through me as I tried to catch my breath. I glared at Ethan, my eyes practically shooting daggers. Wait, teacher. I'd like to reconsider my decision, I blurted out. The counselor's eyes lit up as she turned to face me. Sophia, you've finally come to your senses. That's more like it. Working so much only hurts your studies. With your talent, you should focus more on your academics. Ethan looked at me in disbelief, as though my behavior was completely beyond his understanding. Sophia, You've never cared about scholarships before, he said, his voice tinged with confusion. Seeing Ethan this close, my chest tightened for a brief moment. Sophia, I really need this money. Can you let me have this opportunity? Ethan's tone softened, and he gazed at me earnestly, his pretty eyes downcast, a hint of pleading in his expression. That look, how many times had I seen it before? It always worked. Whenever Ethan gave me that look, I'd move mountains for him. Sophia, please help me. Okay. His words echoed in my mind. In our long and short life together, how many times had he said those exact words? Sophia, my brother's getting married. You're his sister-in-law. You can't let him stay single forever. Right. Sophia, my sister is getting married, but her fiancé doesn't have much money. Can you help us buy them a house? That way, she'll have more respect in her new home. Sophia, my parents are getting old. I want them to move in with us so we can take better care of them. Every time Ethan said, Sophia, you're the best, I made concessions. I compromised again and again until I became the unhealthiest person in my family, working so hard that I ended up with stomach problems, a herniated disc, cervical spondylosis, and frozen shoulder. Ethan, you can't say that. For the past 2 years, Sophia has given you every single scholarship opportunity. Her grades and evaluations are much higher than yours, and her family situation isn't any better. Her parents didn't even want her to attend college. They just wanted her to get married. Every penny of her tuition and living expenses comes from her part-time jobs. As a classmate, you shouldn't just think about yourself when it comes to this scholarship. From every perspective, Sophia is far more qualified. The counselor interjected, her voice stern with disappointment. I froze for a moment, remembering my wedding from my last life. It was held in Ethan's rural hometown. The counselor had traveled all day by train to attend, bringing a generous gift. On my wedding day, she held my hand with tears in her eyes and said, Sophia, you need to learn to love yourself. 2 lifetimes later, I finally understood the meaning of her words. In my last life, Ethan was the brightest light in my dark world. He was my salvation and my hope. But in this life, I needed to become my own light. As we left the office, each lost in our own thoughts, Ethan kept glancing at me, his brows furrowed, his gaze probing and curious, as if trying to unravel a puzzle. His scrutiny felt rude and invasive, and I finally snapped. What are you staring at? I asked sharply. Why did you change your mind all of a sudden? Ethan asked cautiously. I almost laughed. Since you were so disdainful of our last life and decided to start over, why should I continue helping you and making sacrifices for you? Ethan blinked, his face blank with confusion. He had no idea. In our last life, no matter how hard things got, I never complained, never let him see my struggles. I always smiled and said, I'm fine. I'm doing great. Now, seeing me act so differently from the Sophia he once knew, he was utterly bewildered. I looked around and met Ethan's gaze. As expected, it was filled with realization. Sophia, so you've been reborn too, he said. I neither confirmed nor denied it. I just gave him a long, deep look before striding forward. Hey, wait, Sophia, why are you mad? If that's the case, let's just be honest and lay everything out. Ethan called after me, his tone laced with irritation. My cold attitude had clearly gotten under his skin. After all, I'd spent a lifetime spoiling him, and moments like these, when I showed him indifference, were exceedingly rare. We ended up sitting on a bench by the campus lake. The sunlight danced on the water's surface, as if someone had sprinkled gold dust over it. The scenery was beautiful, but I couldn't bring myself to appreciate it. Ethan was speaking. The happiness in our last life wasn't yours to begin with. It was something you stole. I tolerated you for an entire lifetime and paid the price for my mistake. So what's wrong with pursuing the person I truly like in this life? His voice was tinged with frustration, his neck stiff with indignation as he glared at me. It was as though he believed I was the root of all his misfortunes. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Ethan, if you didn't like me, why didn't you say so from the start? You could have spoken up in college, before we got married, or at any point during those decades together. I didn't hold a gun to your head and force you to marry me, did I? That only made Ethan angrier. Isn't it your fault? After I confessed, you went straight to your roommate, Diana, who's a blabbermouth. She told everyone in the class group chat and even said I should treat everyone to a meal to celebrate. If I had broken things off immediately, can you imagine what everyone would have said about me? Later, everyone kept saying how great you were to me. Like breaking up with you would make me a villain in everyone's eyes. Sophia, you put me on this moral pedestal and forced me to stay there with guilt and social pressure. In my memories, Ethan had always been radiant, fair-skinned with sharp features that made him look like he was glowing. He was the most handsome boy I had ever seen. And even as he aged, that image stayed with me. Now, as I squinted at him, scrutinizing every inch of his face, I noticed his pale skin had a dullness to it, with 2 pimples on his chin. His nose, while high-bridged, was a bit too broad, softening his overall appearance. That once dazzling glow? It had never been his. It came from the filter of my love for him. Fine, I said coolly. Let's pretend we never met in this life. Don't contact me again. With that, I stood up and walked away. Something inside me crashed and shattered into pieces, leaving only ruins behind. I came from a rural family with a deep preference for sons over daughters. My parents saw me as a financial burden, trying every possible way to recoup their loss. When I was in middle school, they told me repeatedly that as soon as I graduated, I'd be sent to work in a factory. To escape that fate, I studied like my life depended on it and ended up earning the top score in the county to get into the best high school. The school waived all my tuition fees and promised scholarships. Even the village head and local officials visited my parents multiple times to convince them to let me continue studying. When it came time for college, my parents grudgingly agreed, but only on the condition that I send $2,000 home every month. I agreed without hesitation, then used the opportunity to transfer my residency to the school and cut all ties with them. I blocked their contact information and, with the help of the village head, ensured they couldn't find me. My parents, who had never shown interest in my life, didn't even know my major or my class. By the time I started college, I had no family to speak of. I had desperately longed for a home, for love. In my last life, I clung to Ethan like a drowning person grasping for driftwood. Even when he treated me poorly, he was still 1,000 times better than my parents. In that rural home, I didn't even have a private room, just a corner of the living room where my bed stood, offering no privacy or dignity. I worshipped Ethan for every scrap of kindness he showed me, willing to sacrifice everything for him. But now, I finally understood. I shouldn't have been looking for love from others. I needed to learn to love myself. No one could be my savior but me. With renewed determination, I strode forward, leaving the darkness of my past behind. I ultimately secured the scholarship. The counselor told me that Peyton, the senior funding the award, wanted to meet me. When I saw him, my jaw nearly dropped. It was him, the man who had invested in our company in my previous life and saved us from bankruptcy. After Ethan and I got married, Peyton had disappeared from our lives. I never expected to see him again. I couldn't hide my excitement. Mr. Peyton, thank you so much. I bowed earnestly, and he chuckled at my serious demeanor. Take a seat, he said. Our conversation was pleasant, and we even exchanged contact information. Peyton told me to reach out if I ever encountered any difficulties. I walked back to the dorm in high spirits. A favor as great as Peyton's couldn't be repaid with mere gratitude. In my last life, he had been a key figure in saving us. And in this life, he was once again my benefactor. Now, with my background in e-commerce, still in its infancy during this era, I could help Peyton build his own e-commerce team. It would be a good way to repay him. Because of my lightened mood, the future suddenly felt brighter. I generously bought a bag full of fruit and snacks for my roommates and returned to the dorm, only to find 2 large bags of KFC sitting on Lily's desk. Seeing me walk in, Lily casually handed me a burger and 2 egg tarts. You didn't have lunch, did you? Eat these while they're hot, she said. Diana, sitting nearby, wiggled her eyebrows dramatically. Go on, eat. This is from your lucky treasure. I blinked in confusion. Lucky treasure? What treasure? Oh, come on. Lily and Ethan are together now, Diana declared with an exaggerated grin. Lily rolled her eyes at Diana, her tone playful. Eat your chicken drumsticks and stop running your mouth. I stared at Lily, caught off guard. She and Ethan were together now? Lily glanced at me awkwardly. Having lived together in the same dorm room, spending nearly 24 hours a day together, it wasn't hard for her to figure out that I had harbored feelings for Ethan. Love and a cough. Two things in the world that are nearly impossible to hide. Lily brushed her hair aside and smiled, her discomfort showing through. Sophia, you don't mind, do you? I smiled back, radiating as much sincerity as I could muster. What are you talking about? Of course, I don't mind. We're friends. Nothing else matters. What's past is past, dark and irretrievable. The road ahead is bright and full of promise. Ethan was just part of my history now. My focus was on studying hard and earning money. That evening, Ethan treated our entire dorm to hot pot for dinner. At the table, he was attentive to Lily, pulling out her chair, pouring her water, and peeling shrimp for her. Lily seemed both touched and embarrassed, stealing glances at me frequently, as if worried I'd be upset. I kept my head down, focused on eating beef slices, tripe, and duck feet. Back when Ethan and I were together, we were both poor students. I was reluctant to let him spend money on me, so our dates were always limited to cheap hot pot or fast food. Even then, we often had to split the bill. Opportunities like this, where Ethan paid for everyone, were rare. I had to make the most of it, eating enough to make up for my frugal past life. I used to believe that true feelings could be reciprocated with equal sincerity. Now I knew better. You can't exchange a human heart for a dog's. When the bill came, Ethan paid over $500, easily more than half a month of his living expenses. In our later years, when money wasn't an issue, Ethan had developed extravagant spending habits. Adjusting to a student budget again might be a rude awakening for him. People think being reborn means holding the key to untold wealth. But here we were, second-year college students who couldn't scrape together $1,000 between us. Sure, I remembered a few stocks that would skyrocket, but the gains wouldn't happen overnight. Buying a house? That was a distant dream. We couldn't even afford our meals, let alone property. Ethan's family background wasn't much better than mine. The main difference was that he came from a slightly wealthier coastal region, and as the eldest son, his parents had poured all their resources into him. Compared to me, his situation seemed marginally better. I started spending my days in the library, meticulously drafting plans. Peyton owned a small smart appliance company that currently only sold products in malls. As someone with extensive experience in e-commerce, I understood the importance of timing. The sooner we entered the online market, the bigger slice of the pie we could claim. In my past life, Ethan and I ran an e-commerce company. I handled operations and sales, while he managed customer service and factory connections. Drafting a proposal now felt like second nature. Within a few days, I had a thick business plan ready to go. "You made this?" Peyton asked, casually leaning back in his chair as he flipped through my plan page by page. I nodded nervously, unable to take my eyes off his handsome face. In my last life, despite years of hard work, I had only achieved modest success, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. Peyton, however, was a true titan in the industry. If I could gain his recognition and align myself with his ship, my achievements in this life could soar to new heights. "It's decent," he said, his voice calm. "We've already started preparing for an e-commerce team. Why don't you join as an intern when you're not in class?" "Really? Thank you so much, Mr. Peyton." I clenched my fists, my eyes practically sparkling with excitement. All the late nights and hard work had finally paid off. "Here's your cheesecake, vanilla milkshake, and strawberry waffle." The waiter interrupted, setting down a table full of desserts. This was the only coffee shop near campus, and its prices were notoriously high. I had only been here once before, accompanying Lily. I gawked at the mountain of cakes and waffles on the table as Peyton stood, straightening the creases in his sleeve. "I have to go now. Eat up, kiddo. You're too skinny." With that, Peyton left, taking my carefully prepared business plan with him. I stayed behind, nestled in my chair, nibbling at the cheesecake. Its rich, creamy texture melted in my mouth, filling it with a fragrant sweetness. "So sweet," I murmured to myself. "What?" Diana's voice broke through my thoughts. Did Ethan really ask to borrow money from you? Diana asked, her face incredulous as she turned to Lily. Ew, was caught off guard, though the surprise quickly gave way to understanding. Ethan's habit of borrowing money had been cultivated by me. Back when I worked tirelessly at part-time jobs, he would spend most of his free time in the library. By the end, I was financially more secure than he was and often gave him money. Whenever he hesitated to accept it, I would frame it as a loan to make him feel less burdened. Ethan and I were each other's first love. After getting together, neither of us had interacted much with the opposite sex. Ethan probably thought that since couples share such an intimate bond, borrowing money should feel as natural as borrowing it from a close friend. How much did he ask for? How could he even bring himself to ask? You two haven't been together that long, Diana exclaimed, grabbing Lily's arm, her face full of disbelief. Not much, just $1,000, Lily said, visibly annoyed. He told me he put all his scholarship money into stocks. Ethan had never dabbled in stocks during college. If I remembered correctly, he only started exploring investments and financial management when we were in our 40s and financially stable. Could he really recall the stock market fluctuations from our college years? Not much. That's nearly a month's living expenses, Diana retorted. Just because your family is well off doesn't mean it's nothing. Lily's frustration was evident. I'm definitely not lending him money. What kind of guy asks a girl for money? If you're broke, maybe don't date. He's been buying me all these things, but now it turns out I have to foot the bill myself? What a joke. I quietly lowered my head and continued reading my book, unsure how long their relationship could last. The next day, I woke up early. Peyton's company wasn't far from campus, but it still took over an hour by bus. I sat in my seat, listening to English recitations on my phone, when a familiar figure boarded the bus. Ethan stormed toward me, yanked out one of my earbuds, and practically yelled, Sophia, did you tell Lily to break up with me? What was wrong with this guy? I snatched my earbud back, rolling my eyes dramatically. Ethan, can you stay away from me? Running into you this early in the morning is just bad luck. Ethan's usually bright eyes looked like they were ablaze with anger. I thought we made things clear the other day. I've always liked Lily. What happened between us was just a misunderstanding. Why can't you stop meddling in my relationship? Wow, aren't you full of yourself? Who would bother sabotaging your love life? Lily dumped you because you asked her for money, not because of me, I retorted. Ethan froze. Money? She broke up with me over money? But what's wrong with borrowing money? It's not like I wouldn't pay her back. Ignoring him, I tapped the shoulder of the guy sitting in front of me. Hey, let me ask you something. If a boyfriend of 2 weeks asked his girlfriend to lend him $1,000, should she do it? The guy frowned immediately. What kind of man asks a woman for money? If he truly likes you, he'd rather beg on the streets than ask you for cash. That's basic dignity and responsibility as a man. Take my advice. Dump him. Ethan sat stunned, as if he had just been dealt a heavy blow. He turned to me, his expression confused. But before, you used to lend me money all the time. I forced a sarcastic smile. That's because I was an idiot. And it was the truth. Only now did I realize how foolish I had been in my past life. All the sacrifices I made for Ethan and his family were just self-serving acts of martyrdom. I thought my kindness would earn their gratitude. When it didn't, I assumed I hadn't been kind enough. Reality had taught me a harsh lesson. My lifetime of giving had only been seen by Ethan as the biggest mistake of his life. Ethan turned his head to look out the window, silent for the rest of the ride. We didn't speak again. Why are you following me? Ethan asked irritably when we got off the bus. I matched his annoyed tone. Who's following you? I'm here for an internship. To my surprise, we both ended up at Peyton's company. Peyton personally welcomed us and assigned us both to the e-commerce department. Ethan was visibly shocked to see Peyton, and when Peyton left, he sneered at me. Sophia, in this new life, you've certainly learned how to cozy up to the rich and powerful. Right back at you, I replied coldly. Time flies when you're busy. The team leader in the operations group treated me with increasing respect, starting with little Sophia, then just Sophia, and finally Miss Sophia. If I stayed long enough, He might even start calling me Professor Sophia. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't get the same treatment. Like the other interns, he was stuck doing menial tasks like printing and photocopying. After all, Ethan's real strength was in after-sales support, which didn't require much skill in an e-commerce setup. My internship life was smooth and fulfilling. Peyton's company paid interns generously, and with his scholarship support, I no longer needed to juggle part-time jobs to cover tuition and living expenses. This gave me more time to focus on my studies. My days were busy but satisfying. Ethan, despite securing the internship through his counselor's connections, rarely showed up. He spent most of his time dating Lily. After some effort, he managed to reconcile with her. Ethan cherished this relationship, putting in everything he had to maintain it, financially and emotionally. Dating, however, is an expensive and time-consuming endeavor. Between shopping trips, movies, dates, and celebrations like birthdays, Christmas, and Valentine's Day, Ethan's money flowed out like water. Before long, he started feeling the strain. He tried suggesting cheaper restaurants, but after one trip to a hot pot place, Lily exploded. Can you believe him? Lily fumed, tossing her bag onto the table. Her eyes were red with anger. I spent 2 hours doing my makeup, washed my hair, and wore a new outfit. And he takes me to eat hot pot? Do you know how greasy that place is? The smoke gets all over your clothes and hair. He's just looking down on me. I buried my head in my book. But Lily's words drew my attention. I looked up in confusion and asked, "What's wrong with treating someone to hot pot on a date?" Lily walked over, pinched my cheek, and said, "Are you dumb? If he treats me to hot pot, it means that's all I'm worth to him. A bowl of hot pot. Today it's hot pot. Tomorrow it'll be plain buns and water. If dating means living like that, wouldn't I be better off single? Why even bother with a relationship if it's going to lower my quality of life?" Lily's perspective on love was worlds apart from mine, and it shook me. To me, relationships were about mutual effort, enduring hardship together. But what about people who are really poor? How do they date? I asked. Lily rolled her eyes. If you're that poor, you should focus on making money, not dating. Dating takes time and money. If you can't even fill your stomach, how could you even think about romance? And if a man truly loves a woman, he wouldn't let her suffer with him. Seeing my stunned expression, Lily dragged a chair over, sat across from me, and began to lecture me earnestly. "Sophia, don't be foolish. People always say men have 3 great joys: getting promoted, getting rich, and losing their wife. Why the joy in losing a wife? So they can find someone younger and prettier. Of course, do you think a man will appreciate you for struggling alongside him? No. He'll just think he's amazing and has a magnetic personality. And when he gets rich, the first thing he'll do is ditch you because you've seen him at his worst. And that makes it hard for him to boast in front of you." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Wasn't Ethan proof of that? The first thing he did after being reborn was dump me. His long-suffering wife. I held Lily's hand and said, "Keep going, tell me more." In my past life, even though we lived in the same dorm, I hardly ever had time to talk to my roommates. I was always rushing between classes and part-time jobs. While they were still asleep, I'd already left for work. And when I returned at night, they were getting ready for bed. My life back then was a monotonous cycle. As the days passed, Lily and Ethan quarreled often. Meanwhile, I threw all my energy into my studies and work. Soon, summer vacation arrived. As usual, I applied to stay in the dorms. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in 2 years. In my past life, when Ethan and I got married, my parents demanded $300,000 in dowry money from him, threatening to humiliate his family in their village if they didn't pay. Although I ended up covering the costs myself, the whole ordeal left me deeply ashamed in front of Ethan's family. Back then, Ethan had been my pillar of support. He told me, "Your parents may not treat you well, but I will. I'll give you a real home." In this life, I owed nothing to my parents. That debt was paid in full last time. Now, I was determined to build my own life. I worked tirelessly, even on weekends, practically living at the office. My colleagues began to notice and express concern, especially our team leader. "Sophia, you're young. You need to take care of your health." Are you having financial troubles? If it's about money, just let me know. Money can solve anything. I laughed it off and politely declined, but somehow the matter reached Peyton. One day, he handed me a bonus check, and my jaw dropped when I saw the amount. $300,000. Our company had a youthful, energetic atmosphere, and everyone called Peyton boss. Over time, I started doing the same. When I asked why the bonus was so large, Peyton simply said, "Because you're worth it." At that time, houses in smaller cities only cost about $3 to $4 per square meter. With Peyton's bonus, I could already buy a decent home. The head of the e-commerce department gets a commission on sales. From now on, whatever Old Sue gets, you'll get too, Peyton added. I gasped. Old Sue, our team leader, was a computer science graduate from a top university. His commissions were enormous, amounting to millions annually. Standing there, torn between wanting to refuse and being tempted, I must have looked comically conflicted. Peyton chuckled and gently patted my head. I said, "You're worth it." Dazed, I left the office. Peyton's generosity had left me stunned. Was there a more magnanimous boss in the world? I doubted it. "Hey, Sophia, have you thought about buying some cryptocurrency?" My team leader suddenly asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. Cryptocurrency? Like Bitcoin? I asked. Yeah, it's new and pretty interesting, he said casually. Bitcoin, the currency that was worth a few cents back then, but would later skyrocket to $140,000 per coin. Without hesitation, I used the entire $300,000 bonus to buy Bitcoin, acquiring 50,000 coins in total. It felt excessive, but I knew selling them in bulk later could be tricky. Still, with 50,000 Bitcoins, my future was set. I'd be a billionaire in no time. For the first time, I felt an unshakable sense of security. Of course, I kept working. No matter how wealthy my future self might be, I still needed to eat and save for a home now. Hey, bro, I finally found you. A sudden cry interrupted my thoughts. A baby's wail echoed through the office. I looked up to see a young girl holding an infant, rushing toward Ethan. It was his younger sister. Tao, what are you doing here? Ethan asked, his face turning crimson as he quickly stood up. Bro, something's happened at home, she said, clearly distressed. The rest of the office watched in stunned silence. Tao, just 19, looked like a high schooler with her babyish face. Seeing her holding a baby made the whole scene even more bizarre. Who is this? Ethan, someone asked. Ethan stiffened, grabbed Tao by the arm, and led her out of the office without another word. I remembered. A year ago, something had indeed happened to Ethan's family. His father had fallen from a construction site and broken his leg. A severe injury. At the time, I had even helped cover part of the medical expenses. But why had Tao brought a child with her? Tao was a traditional girl from a rural area. She had dropped out after middle school to work and support her brother's education. After a few years of working, she fell in love with a boy from her village, got married young, and had a child. Ethan's family received a bride price of $100,000 from her husband's family, but gave her only 3 blankets as a dowry. Her life after marriage was far from easy, but she was immensely proud of her brother, the college-educated genius. Ethan's younger brother was still in middle school. With their father injured, the family's situation was bound to get worse. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Ethan came back upstairs, his head hanging low. He pulled me aside in a rush. Sophia, can you lend me $100,000? I stared at him, wondering if I had misheard. Sophia, you've called him your dad for decades. You can't just stand by and do nothing. Right. Have you lost your mind? He's your father. What does that have to do with me? Ethan took a deep breath. Well, then at least as a classmate, can you lend me some money? I promise I'll pay you back with interest. Since Tao was married with a child and Ethan's mother had to take care of her youngest son and their elderly relatives, the responsibility of caring for their father fell entirely on Ethan. He started falling asleep at work, and his performance took a nosedive. By the end of summer vacation, the company terminated his internship. With no steady, well-paying job, Ethan had to juggle part-time work to cover his tuition and living expenses. Unsurprisingly, his grades suffered too. Finally, during our senior year, when everyone was busy looking for jobs and internships, Lily broke up with him again. "Lily, get out here." Ethan stood outside the dormitory, his eyes red as he shouted her name over and over. Diana and I watched helplessly from the sidelines. Diana's chest heaved with anger. "What's wrong with Ethan? They broke up, and he's still making a scene. How many days has he been doing this?" I looked at Ethan with disdain. He had been given a second chance at life but had turned himself into a complete mess. His work failed. His studies failed. And naturally, his love life failed too. People think being reborn is like getting a cheat code for success. But without effort, there's no future. It's like studying. Someone who doesn't work hard could relive high school 10 times and still not get into a good university. Life is no different. Rebirth only gives you insight into trends, a few extra opportunities. It doesn't guarantee success. Even if you wanted to make money through real estate, you'd still need to earn your first pot of gold. Ethan had always been a laid-back person. In our past life, I had been the one dragging him forward. We argued often because of it. He liked fishing, painting, and drinking tea, believing money wasn't everything and life needed poetry and tranquility. But I had always wanted more. To climb higher, see farther, and experience things I had never seen before. Lily was so angry she couldn't even eat. "Do you know how ridiculous Ethan is? He kept saying we should get married right after graduation, that we'd work hard together and buy a house so he could move his parents in with us. And his sister, the last time she came over, she spent the entire meal talking about how I should have lots of sons for their family and take care of his parents after marriage. What do they think this is? A royal dynasty? Sons. My foot. If someone has a poor background, fine, they can work hard to improve it. But family values like that? No way. I'd have to be insane to stick around and become their servant." I lowered my head, feeling a twinge of shame. Ethan's family had said the same things to me in our past life. Back then, I had felt uncomfortable but brushed it off. After a few more failed attempts to reconcile, Ethan finally gave up. With more and more women gossiping about him, he had no choice but to let go. Besides, he was busy trying to make ends meet, juggling classes and part-time jobs. I was grateful I hadn't thrown myself into the whirlpool of love like Ethan, neglecting everything else. Peyton kept his word. By the end of senior year, I received a profit share from the company. I used that money to take out a mortgage on several well-located properties, finally stabilizing my life. Lily remained one of my closest friends. She passed the civil service exam, and her family bought her a home outright. Her life was comfortable and carefree. Many of our classmates stayed in the city after graduation, and I became one of the most successful among them. Later, I heard that Ethan was still single. He had been going on blind dates, but without a house or car. And with his family's poor financial situation, he struggled to find anyone willing to marry him. Lily eventually got married to her high school sweetheart, a man from a family that matched hers perfectly. They had been childhood sweethearts, growing up together. After the wedding, as I was leaving the hotel, I ran into Ethan at the entrance. His face looked tired, his once fair chin now covered in stubble. "Sophia, you're laughing at me in your heart, aren't you? I was just chasing after the love I wanted. What did I do wrong?" I chuckled lightly. "Ethan, in my last life, I used to think the same thing." With that, I turned away and drove off in my Porsche 911. Under the bright sunlight, Ethan stood forlornly at the entrance, watching me leave. He didn't move for a long time. "Ethan." I felt as though fate had granted me a second chance at life to mend my past regrets. It wasn't that Sophia wasn't good. There probably wasn't a more virtuous, magnanimous woman in the world. But being with her was just so exhausting. When I got into college, the village chief and a group of people sent me off with a grand procession of drums and gongs. I had been the pride of the entire village since childhood. But after I got together with Sophia, she outshone me in every way. Her grades were better. Her career was better. And she excelled at everything. We started a business together. And every time I went to inspect goods or negotiate deals, people would praise me for marrying such an incredible wife. They'd go on about how capable, hardworking, and outstanding Sophia was. It was ridiculous. I was exceptional too. Yet they made it sound like I was living off her. Over time, I grew increasingly resentful of her. Sophia was always brimming with energy, running the company, managing our child, and even directing me. She would push me to close deals, monitor my performance, and publicly criticize me during company meetings if my department failed to meet its targets. She treated our child the same way, pushing him to excel in academics, piano, basketball, and just about every extracurricular imaginable, as if preparing him for a decathlon. Being her son was a miserable experience. Women, in my mind, should be gentle, sweet, and pure. Like Lily, she knew how to act coy, dress up, and call me big brother in the sweetest tone. I wanted to give her the best of everything just to see her smile. But after 2 weeks with Lily, I began to notice something was off. Why didn't she ever pay for anything? Back when I had money, it wouldn't have mattered. But I was still a student now. Although I had just received my scholarship, that was meant to cover a year of living expenses. When I was with Sophia, we always split the bills. She'd say, "It's the 21st century. Women work, earn money, and go to college too. Men shouldn't have to pay for everything." I thought she made a lot of sense. Times had changed, it was okay to share expenses. But Lily didn't pay for anything. And she spent extravagantly. One day it was hot pot, the next Western cuisine, and then Japanese food. She'd order a table full of dishes, take a few bites, and declare herself full. I couldn't stand the waste, so I'd finish everything, gritting my teeth. I hinted multiple times that she should pay occasionally, but she pretended not to understand. Left with no choice, I paid for everything. Before long, my money was gone. When I asked her to lend me some, she broke up with me. I was sure Sophia must have said something to her. I knew she still loved me, but I had grown weary of her love in my past life, and didn't want to rekindle that relationship. Jealousy truly is a terrifying thing. But is it really impossible for a man to borrow money from a woman? I was confused. In my last life, Sophia had given me money countless times during my toughest moments. She'd even pat her chest confidently and say, "Don't feel bad. It's just a loan," though I never got the chance to repay her. After all, we became a family. It never seemed like an issue. I flipped through my phone to find a picture of Sophia, but all I saw were photos of Lily. I felt a pang of regret. I missed Sophia. We ended up interning at the same company. Watching Sophia every day, full of energy and confidence, stirred up complicated emotions in me, even resentment. In my past life, she had professed her love for me endlessly, claiming I was her one true love. Yet here she was, thriving without me. I began to deliberately pick on her, making sarcastic remarks that didn't even make sense to me. First, Sophia would get annoyed, but soon she stopped reacting altogether. I panicked. Hatred isn't the opposite of love. Indifference is. Sophia had started ignoring me. She got along well with her colleagues, many of whom began introducing her to potential partners. As an intern, she had already become one of the team leader's favorites. Even Peyton couldn't help but notice her potential. For the first time, I realized that Sophia was a shining star in her own right. Meanwhile, Lily's clinginess began to wear on me. Did she have nothing else to do? Almost every time she reached out, it was to ask me to pay for something. Our frequent arguments eventually led to another breakup. This time, it felt final. I spent days shouting Lily's name under her dorm window. Truthfully, I wasn't that attached to her anymore. But having given up Sophia to pursue Lily, failing to make it work felt like the ultimate humiliation. To be with Lily, I had sacrificed my studies, my internship, and Sophia. And yet, here I was, completely lost. I had this golden opportunity to redo my life. And somehow, I was doing worse than before. The money I had invested in the stock market was all gone. Those promising stocks I remembered from the future were currently sinking me into debt. They would eventually rise. But I couldn't afford to wait. I needed cash now. I worked every part-time job I could find, pouring all my time into earning money. Was this how hard Sophia had worked in our past life? How did she manage to balance work and studies? I thought about Sophia more and more. I heard she had been promoted, bought a house, and was now Peyton's most trusted employee. My parents constantly pushed me to get married. and my coworkers occasionally tried to set me up with someone, but I had no interest. The women I met on blind dates were all arrogant and shallow, criticizing me for my rural background and my younger brother. How laughable. None of them could hold a candle to Sophia. Yet they dared to look down on me. I threw myself into work, slowly realizing just how much Sophia had supported me in my past life. It wasn't me who had carried her. It was her who had shielded me. When I heard that Lily was getting married, I felt a strange sense of excitement. Sophia would surely come back for the wedding. And she did. She wore a custom-tailored suit, looking sharp and confident, a true image of a strong, independent woman. She was dazzling, more radiant than the sun itself. I didn't want to appear weak in front of her, so I casually brought up the past. Sophia simply said, "In my last life, I was also just chasing my idea of love." She looked at me with calm indifference, but her words left me breathless, as if my heart had been gripped tightly. I watched her leave, her figure growing smaller as she walked away. My heart ached unbearably. I had lost my moon, and I knew it was forever.